In the last episode, we dove headfirst into the world of cursed carriers, and the comments section just exploded. Some of you understood the assignment perfectly and suggested some truly abysmal carriers. And so, by popular request and mild professional concern, I'm doing it again. So, welcome back, dear viewer, to Cursed Ship Images, the series that keeps finding new ways to prove that seaworthiness is optional and hindsight is undefeated. These 5 floating fiascos were chosen by you, the viewers. Ships so misguided, so accident-prone, or so tragically unlucky that they make even HMS Furious look like a success story. So let's light off all boilers, pray they don't catch fire, and begin. Starting off strong here with the Admiral Kuznetsov, Russia's one and only aircraft carrier, the floating embodiment of everything that happens when you mix Soviet optimism with duct tape and cheap fuel. Launched in 1985, she was supposed to showcase Russian naval power. Instead, she's become the world's most expensive fog machine. The Kuznetsov runs on a thick sludge called mazout.
Why? It's cheaper.
Which is basically liquid asphalt. When burned, the ship becomes smokier than a Moscow discotheque on Hooker's Drink-Free Night.
He's just a man. Stand by your man.
It's so dirty, in fact, that every time she leaves port, NATO satellites think Murmansk is on fire. Russian officials have blamed the smoke on lazy engineers who failed to preheat the mazout properly.
How the fuck did you get this job?
But the rest of the world knows she's not malfunctioning, she's just cosplaying as another shining example of Soviet engineering from the 1980s.
What have they done?
Her career is a highlight reel of failure. She's broken down in the Bay of Biscay, been towed to Syria, and returned to Russia under her own power approximately never. The Navy is so used to her dying mid-voyage that she travels with her own rescue tug. During her 2016 Syrian deployment, 2 of her 12 carrier-based aircraft crashed into the sea because the arresting cables failed. The rest of the air group decided to move ashore, abandoning the ship and the attempt to modernize her? A comedy in 3 acts. First, the dry dock she was sitting in sank, then a crane collapsed onto her flight deck, and finally a fire broke out in 2019 that killed at least 1 worker and probably her remaining morale. Today, she's still undergoing repairs, a process that's lasted longer than most Cold War treaties. Her hull is corroded, her engines as unstable as reactor number 4, and her crew has literally been reassigned to the Ukrainian front lines. In every measurable sense, she's not a warship anymore. She's a monument to denial. If the Kuznetsov were a person, she'd be the relative who insists they're still driving fine as they reverse through the neighbor's fence. And it seems even the Russians have finally had enough of this barely floating disaster. According to a recent report, the carrier has finally been written off and could potentially be scrapped in the near future. Regardless, I seriously doubt Fleet Admiral Kuznetsov, who labored under the thumb of Stalin's naval ambitions, would be proud of his namesake.
And so I've walked outside and I said, "Oh, what are you doing, mate? Like, you can't be leaving the scene." And he goes, "Don't be a hero,
From Russia's
mate." And I
worst
said,
to Australia's unluckiest. Next, let's talk about HMAS Melbourne, the only aircraft carrier in history with more friendly kills than enemy ones. This ship managed to sink 2 Allied warships in peacetime. 2. That's not bad luck. That's a career in maritime manslaughter. Her first accident happened in 1964 when she collided with the destroyer HMAS Voyager during a nighttime exercise, cutting the smaller ship in half and killing 82 men. 2 royal commissions investigated but couldn't agree on who was at fault. Everyone on the carrier survived, which can't be said about the crew of Voyager. Theories range from communication error to a misinterpretation of red flight deck lights. Whatever the truth, the result was catastrophic. Then, in 1969, it happened again. This time with the American destroyer USS Frank E. Evans during a sea tow exercise in the South China Sea.
Really?
The carrier plowed clean through her bow, splitting her in two and killing 74 American sailors, including 3 brothers from Nebraska. The forward section of Evans sank in minutes, while the aft section stayed afloat, tied up alongside Melbourne like some sort of sick macabre trophy. To her credit, the Australians mounted an extraordinary rescue, lowering cutters and boats to pull survivors from the oil-slicked water. But nothing could erase the reputation. After the Evans collision, Melbourne became the ship no one wanted to sail near. The joke started immediately. Melbourne doesn't need torpedoes, she is one. The only correct maneuver was to steer away and pray she didn't change course.
Gli amici della vedetta ammirata da tutti noi, questa gemma propria della nostra cultura, saranno naturalmente accolti sotto la mia protezione.
Next up, the Italian carrier Aquila, which means eagle, a majestic name for a bird that never even made it out of the nest. In 1940, Mussolini decided that Italy needed an aircraft carrier to compete with Britain and France. The problem was, Italy had no experience building carriers, no proper aircraft for them, and no idea what they were doing. So they took an old passenger liner, SS Roma, and started bolting on aircraft carrier bits like it was an art project.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
For a brief moment, there was hope. The ship was reshaped into something that vaguely resembled a carrier: sleek bow, new hangar, flight deck, arresting gear, and elevators. But the project moved slower than Italian bureaucracy, which, if you ever ordered an espresso in Naples, you know is very slow. The Navy balked at the cost and complexity, and the plan was halted, restarted, and halted again. By 1943, after years of labor and political theater, the ship was still incomplete. When Italy surrendered in 1943, German forces seized the unfinished hulk and considered finishing it for themselves, until even they realized how bad the situation was. In 1945, Italian commandos loyal to the new government sabotaged her, sinking the ship in shallow water to keep it from being used as a block ship. In the end, Aquila was raised and scrapped, having never launched a single aircraft. She was the perfect symbol of fascist Italy's naval ambitions: loud, expensive, overpromised, and utterly useless. If Mussolini's eagle ever flew, it was straight into the ground. Italy tried to make a carrier, but all they really built was a metaphor.
Look at a mess with my boy.
これでは眠れる巨人を起こし奮い立たせる結果を。
Now we come to the Japanese carrier Taiho, whose name means Great Phoenix, which is ironic because she only managed the burning part. Laid down in 1941 as Japan's first carrier with an armored flight deck, she was supposed to be the next evolution of naval air power: faster, tougher, more advanced than anything that came before. She was completed in 1944 with heavy protection for her magazines and bombs. Unfortunately, her aviation fuel tanks were less protected, surrounded by empty air pockets that turned her into a giant floating gas can. When Taihō sailed for the Battle of the Philippine Sea, she was Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa's flagship, carrying 42 aircraft and Japan's last real hope for a decisive carrier victory. Then along came USS Albacore, whose captain, lacking a firing solution, launched 6 torpedoes by eye. 1 torpedo found the carrier, and that's all it took.
Oh no! What happened?
The explosion ruptured her fuel tanks and jammed her forward elevator, creating a pit of seawater, oil, and aviation fuel. Damage control efforts were a disaster. Ozawa refused to take the damage seriously, ordered the elevator pit planked over with wood, and continued flight operations.
What are you, retarded?
Meanwhile, gasoline fumes built up throughout the ship. In a desperate attempt to ventilate, an inexperienced junior officer turned the fans to full power, spreading the fumes even faster. At 3:30 p.m., the ship detonated. The blast tore open her sides, blew the armored flight deck upward like a tin lid, and killed nearly everyone in the engine rooms. Ozawa barely escaped with his staff and the emperor's portrait. Fewer than 500 of the 2,150 aboard survived. The Great Phoenix went down in one of the most preventable explosions in naval history. She was designed to rise from the ashes. Instead, she made them.
Crawl out through the fallout, baby.
And finally, we come to USS Saratoga, affectionately known as Sarah, America's hard luck carrier. Some of you say she wasn't cursed at all, just criminally unlucky. Others think she carried a hex from the moment she left the slipway, like all the other converted carriers on this list. But let's review the evidence. Commissioned in 1927, Sarah was the second ship of the Lexington class, fast, sleek, and ahead of her time. Unlike her sister, Lexington, who went down fighting during the Battle of the Coral Sea, Sarah somehow managed to miss nearly every major carrier battle of World War II. She was torpedoed in January 1942, sidelined for the Doolittle raid in Coral Sea. Then, when she finally rejoined the fight, she was torpedoed again after the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, forcing her to miss Santa Cruz.
Fuck.
By 1944, while every other carrier was slugging it out at the Philippine Sea, Sarah was in dry dock at Bremerton getting a long refit. When she did get back to the front in 1945, she was hit by kamikazes during the invasion of Iwo Jima, because of course she was. Bad timing, bad luck, bad fortune, she was the Navy's equivalent of that kid in every class who was perpetually sick, but somehow continued to get good grades. Still, like a bad penny, she kept turning up. That resilience is part of her legend. Sarah could take a hit, disappear for 6 months, and then show up again like nothing happened. In 1946, it was time to see whether or not Sarah could crawl out through the fallout. With an abundance of much newer and more capable carriers, Saratoga was selected for Operation Crossroads. Struck by one of the first nuclear blasts ever detonated at sea, in typical fashion, she refused to sink, eventually requiring 2 nukes to finally be sent to Bikini Bottom. So, was Saratoga cursed or just stubborn? That's for you to decide. Maybe she was unlucky, maybe she was unkillable, but one thing's for sure, if bad luck were battle stars, Sarah would have won the war single-handedly. And that's it for Cursed Carriers Part 2, the sequel that proves history never runs out of floating disasters. From Russia's chain-smoking embarrassment to Italy's flightless eagle, from Australia's accidental assassin to Japan's self-immolating flagship, and finally, to America's very own unlucky overachiever. They remind us that sometimes ships don't need ghosts to be cursed. Next time, we're casting the net wider, exploring ships cursed by looks, by career, and even by name. So if you've got a contender, a ship so ugly, so unlucky, or so ironically titled it deserves eternal ridicule, drop it in the comments below. Your suggestion might make it into the next deep dive into naval nonsense. Until then, keep your boilers hot, your rescue tugs nearby, and your mazout properly heated. I'm Jack Russell with Bearing Straight. Thanks for watching.